there's such an interesting historical element to these gardens. There's been a real interest taken by governors general or
Yes.
their spouses in the gardens. Why is that the case?
It's difficult to answer. I mean, I think certainly Lady Byng, it was a passion for her, and Adrian Clarkson, it was already a passion for them when they came here. So it's, you know, like you get a garden like this and you think, wow, you know, this is for me to enjoy all the time. And obviously there's that element to it. I think also perhaps the Duke of Connaught, he's sort of unheard of, and he was in sort of 1916, but he made some dramatic changes for the landscape. He did the tiering and all of this sort of thing, and it was kind of bigger concept. And as he was one of the sons of Queen Victoria, they already had an inherent love of landscape and gardening from their work at Osborne House and the vice-regal there, and they already had an inbuilt love of nature, and I think that is part of it. It comes with the person.
What was it like for Victorian gardeners who came here, who had mainly gardened only in a very different climate, to come to a Canadian climate and attempt to build a garden?
Certainly, I know that Alpine Grant, who I think were recorded as the first gardener, head gardener here, and he was at Spencer Wood, which was the Lord Monk's original home when he came over in Quebec, and he kind of developed, obviously one of the things that we read in the historic document, he couldn't get enough plant material. So that was one problem. He was finding a lack of plants, and he wanted to plant the garden and couldn't do that. And then you also look at other records we've got, you know, their first mower, and that probably would have been pony driven, or it may have even, and scythes and things you can see that they purchased in the 1800s. So just controlling nature, because in North America it's quite different. I mean, I found that when I came over here, the seasons are very rapid, and they're not so drawn out. So your seasons, like from spring to summer, can happen in 2 weeks, or even maybe even less. And your transition has got to be really quick. If you're doing any replanting and things like that, you've got only that period of time to really do your planting. You can do a certain amount of planting in the fall, which is traditionally in Europe when you do a lot of planting. But here it's different because you've got such a hard winter that stuff gets lifted out of the ground. So all of these things would have been new, plus the amount of plant material just wasn't available that they were used to. Even for someone, Alpine Grant was a Scotsman, and he'd been used to cold weather, but not like this. So that the extremities of the weather and the climate are one of the biggest challenges.
Does it remain a challenge for you when you
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I think that's just because of my makeup anyways, being a Brit and not used to winters, and, you know, I can't skate and things like that, but it is definitely, I think my main one was just the choice of plants. You really have to, and that's one of the reasons to look at native plants, because they're going to do well for you generally if you put them in the right locations, and they'll do better than some plants that I'm used to as what we used to call bread and butter plants in Britain, the ones you can always rely on. And, you know, things like hostas, for instance, actually I find grow better here because we don't have so many, we certainly don't have the slug, you do get slugs, but we don't have the slug population that we have in Britain because of the rain. And, you know, I find even in my home garden that hostas do a lot better. And, you know, relations will say, you're growing hostas? Ours are already, you know, they're already ripped apart by the slugs. So those sort of things do better, and certainly herbaceous perennials are, you know, the type of plants that you really can play with and really develop. There are certain shrubs that will do well, other shrubs, you know, that don't do so well that would be used to. Things like lilacs, I mean, that's a history connection with Ottawa, is that we have the Isabel Preston lilacs, which are Canadian hybrids, and she did all of her work at the Central Experimental Farm and some out in Manitoba at Morden. And these are bred purposely for hardiness here. And those are the sort of plants that I want, you know, we see as being in the landscape because they're Canadian hybrids, and, you know, they were developed for this climate.
Is there a particular part of the garden that's your favorite?
I would say it's the woodland. I'm a tree guy, and it's not just trees, but it's also the woodland environment, and that is, for me, probably my favourite part, because it's a spring garden essentially. You've got the ferns of the foliage and things like that, but the kind of typical Canadian plants like the trilliums and the Dutchman's breeches, which is a lovely little plant that comes out early, very, very early. It's a form of dicentra with a bleeding heart. Those sort of plants are very, very typical of this area that grow in natural maple woodlands. So that really, for me, really is the great part about being